Imagine for a second having to solve this incredibly complex medical mystery. But there's a catch. The very questions you ask could actually accidentally destroy the evidence. Sounds stressful, right? Well, in today's explainer, we're diving straight into the really rigorous, honestly fascinating methodology of homeopathic case-taking. We're pulling this directly from the academic curriculum of course BHC 6344. We're going to see exactly how practitioners are trained to act as literal medical detectives, meticulously gathering data, evaluating symptoms, and reconstructing a patient's health history, all without introducing a single drop of their own bias.
So, here's our roadmap for the investigation. We'll start with the art of listening, then move on to building the chronic timeline. After that, we'll cover acute and epidemic strategies, constructing the totality, and finally, systematic follow-up assessment.
All right, let's jump right into part 1. The art of listening. According to the course material, a complete consultation actually has a really strict rhythm to it. It has to move through these 5 deliberate phases. You start with preparation. You invite the patient to share their free narrative. Then you clarify specific symptoms, complete the general history, and finally, close it all out with a summary. And this structure? It's completely intentional. It's designed to ensure you get the whole picture without ever turning the interview into an interrogation.
This right here is exactly why absolute neutrality is just paramount. Practitioners have to protect the accuracy of a case by avoiding leading questions at all costs. Just think about the stark contrast here. Asking something open like, what changes the pain, allows the patient to hand over pure, uncontaminated data. But if you ask, you feel better from pressure, correct? Boom, you've just suggested a modality. You've led the witness. To crack the case accurately, the practitioner must never suggest sensations, causes, or modalities. Period.
Moving right along to part 2, building the chronic timeline.
Now, when moving into chronic cases, the practitioner really has to shift gears. It becomes all about reconstructing the longitudinal evolution of a patient's health. Like a true detective, you can't just start at the present symptom. You absolutely have to establish the patient's baseline health. Meaning, what were their life and body like before that very first complaint ever showed up? From there, you're mapping out the onset, major life events, and how they responded to previous treatments. And you're doing all of this without presuming causation.
To actually build out that timeline, evidence is pulled from 4 very distinct buckets. But here's the kicker. The practitioner has to keep these meticulously separate in their clinical records because every single one carries a different risk. The patient brings their own subjective experience, sure, but they might have recall limitations. Relatives give great behavioral observations, but they might be totally biased. And then, of course, you have objective clinical exams and historical medical records. If you mix these up, you compromise the entire investigation.
Okay, part 3, acute and epidemic strategies.
When an emergency strikes, the practitioner's focus has to shift violently. In an acute situation, assessing airway, breathing, circulation, and sudden onset, that entirely overrides long-term health mapping. The chronic MASMs and longitudinal timelines get tossed right out the window because immediate red flags and patient safety completely dictate the action.
During this kind of rapid triage, the investigator is aggressively hunting for what the curriculum calls the exciting cause. This is basically an immediate acute trigger. Think along the lines of a sudden exposure to cold winds, a severe emotional shock, or even spoiled food that happened right before the onset. But, and this is a big but, the practitioner is strongly warned to never let assumed causes blind them to actual emergency red flags.
So what happens when an acute situation scales up into a full-blown epidemic? Well, the methodology scales right along with it. In an epidemic, practitioners map out collective symptom patterns across multiple different patients using standardized domains. By synthesizing the shared, characteristic symptoms across an entire population, they formulate a collective disease picture. And the goal here is to identify a singular strategy known as the Genus Epidemicus.
The course actually gives us a really fantastic problem-solving vignette to show exactly how this works. Imagine an influenza outbreak. You've got 15 patients, and they all present with these exact shared characteristics. Sudden high fever, an intense thirst for large quantities of cold water, severe restlessness, and an extreme fear of death. When you synthesize that specific data, it points completely away from individualized chronic treatments and leads you directly to a singular Genus Epidemicus strategy for this group, which, in this textbook case, is Acetotum napellus.
Which brings us to part 4, constructing the totality.
So now that we have all this raw data gathered up, how does it actually get curated into a defensible case analysis? The answer is the totality of symptoms.
Now, a really common misconception is that the totality is just a giant data dump of every single reported symptom from the interview. Actually, scratch that, it's absolutely not. It is a highly curated hierarchical synthesis. The practitioner has to strictly filter the data, separating the solid, reliable clues from just the everyday background noise of common complaints.
Doing this requires a really strict symptom hierarchy. Down at the very bottom, you have your common diagnostic symptoms. In this framework, common symptoms like, say, joint pain and arthritis carry the absolute lowest analytical weight, just because they apply to literally everyone with the disease. Instead, as you built up the hierarchy, the real gold is found in spontaneous, repeated expressions, strong contradictions, and peculiar modalities. It's those strange, highly individualized quirks that are absolutely crucial to cracking a unique case.
And finally, Part 5. Systematic follow-up assessment.
All right, so the initial investigation is complete. The strategy has been deployed. But any follow-up requires systematically reevaluating the direction, magnitude, and durability of clinical changes. This principle is practically written in stone within the curriculum. Follow-up is a new assessment before it is a new prescription. Practitioners don't just walk in and ask, "Hey, how do you feel?" They rigorously measure the patient's current energy, sleep, and mental state directly against that original baseline health they established way back in Step 2.
And here is where true clinical discipline really comes into play. Let's say a chronic patient shows clear general improvement in fundamental areas like their sleep and energy. The strict rule here is to apply the wait and watch strategy. Even if a few minor symptoms are hanging around, the practitioner has to hold back. No new remedy interventions. You just have to let the initial strategy run its course.
I absolutely love this quote from the source material. The quality of the prescription cannot exceed the quality of the case. It just perfectly anchors our entire journey today as medical detectives. Because honestly, no matter how vast a practitioner's knowledge of remedies might be, the final treatment completely depends on the meticulous, neutral, structurally sound detective work done up front. The solution is literally only ever as good as the investigation.
It's such a fascinating look at the methodology of professional listening and data synthesis, and it leaves us with a pretty provocative thought to ponder. If asking just a single leading question can totally corrupt the evidence in a medical consultation, how often are we altering the truth in our own daily interactions just by how we frame our questions?